I'm Kathleen Dollard, and welcome to this week's webcast on upcoming changes to C#, Visual Basic, and Visual Studio. This series is brought to you by Wintellect Now, with great courses by industry leaders. This week, I'll show you more about the null conditional operator. Remember to set the language version to experimental for all configurations in your project file before using C#6 and Visual Basic 14 features. I've left the code in place from the last episode, and here I'll add a few more twists and turns. To review null conditional chaining, Invoices has a lookup method. I'll use the invoice lookup to get the customer and first name. And I'll change the name to fname to avoid a naming collision. I'll add the null conditional operator to the lookup, and the second null conditional indicates whether to throw an exception if an invoice doesn't have a customer. This is an example of chaining null conditional operators. To illustrate that the operator short-circuits execution, I'll add an extension method to print thank you, and add a call to this method, add a console.read so we can see the output. Remember that print name tag also is printed to the console? Running the code gives tag for Barney, thank you Barney. I'll add a chained call to private thank you, and a call that will fail. I'll also add a direct call to the extension method passing null to illustrate what passing null would look like. Running the code now shows that the lookup of customer ID 42 doesn't call the extension method at all, showing that null conditional operators short circuit. You can also use null conditionals with arrays. I'll switch the allCustomers method from an IEnumerable to an array, and change the code in main. Here, the first null conditional operator ensures that null is returned if allCustomers returns null, and the second null conditional operator returns null if the array contains an item in the second position and that item happens to be null. This will look a little more sensible if I change the allCustomers method to a property, but the basic meaning remains the same. You can use null conditionals with link in where and select clauses, but the code I have here for demonstration might be confusing in a real application. Having an IEnumerable that might be null is probably a bad idea. Returning an empty IEnumerable or array when there are no customers is probably a much better idea. The possibility of null will propagate outward in the application. Don't let the new null conditional operator lead you to put nulls in unexpected places. Another thing to watch out for is how refactoring works, whether you do it through tools or by hand. To start with, I'll remove the null conditional to show how introduce local variable and extract method refactoring normally work. Notice that I'm not including the length in the selection. If I introduce a local variable, it will be for just the first name. If I extract a method, it would be for the first name, get first name. I'll add the null conditional operator back in and highlight precisely the same text. Introducing a local variable is not an option, and extracting a method extends my selection to include the length. What's going on here? I'll manually refactor this code to show the problem that the refactoring tools are helping you avoid. fname2 may be null because the null operator. But since the next line of code has no knowledge of this length is typed as an integer, not a nullable integer. If the customer doesn't exist, the original code gives a null and a nullable integer. The refactored code gives a runtime exception. I want to show you one final trick with null conditional operators. If you create a delegate, any kind of delegate, but I happen to be using a func of string that could be assigned as a lambda expression, I'll assign null to it. You can call this delegate just by adding parens after the delegate variable name. Of course, this will fail because func is null. Wouldn't it be great if you could use a null conditional operator for this? Blech, lots of not very helpful errors. This syntax isn't supported because there were some odd ambiguities. However, explicitly invoking the delegate works just fine. The string y will be null when func is null. Language design is a very messy business.